Welcome, welcome, welcome. This is your brother Asar Hotep, and I am back with another Conversations with Brother Asar. Today is Monday, June the 1st of 2020, the official start of the apocalypse year. And a lot has been going on in the world in general, but in specifically as it regards the United States, more highlighting, I should say, of continuous police brutality that has been going on ever since Africans came to the shores of the United States of America. Even though it wasn't technically the United States when we first came here, but you get what I am saying. And so today's conversation is going to be on something that connects, I believe, directly to an understanding of what is going on today. And so, as a person who studies history, who digs deep into history to understand what is going on today, I would like to reiterate and emphasize the importance of the study of history so that one can see the patterns of history and know how to respond appropriately to the cycles of life that we find ourselves in. And so we are going to be discussing ancient Sparta and modern police brutality and the connection between the two. Now, when people think of modern police brutality, a lot of us don't immediately think of ancient Greece, and in particular, Sparta, which is a city-state in Greece. And I want to show the continuity, the conversation will span several different presentations. So we're just going to begin with this one. And so this is something I just kind of put together last night. So it's not super in detail, but it's enough to give you a good idea of the thought behind what I'm arguing today. So as always, I'd like to thank everyone who is listening live and thank everyone who is listening to the archives when the show ends. And so there are a few people who already made themselves known in the chat. So I'd like to say hello to Queen Medina, Freddie the Third, Brother Ivan, Brother Don, Enigma 9x9, and Juan Love on the on the YouTube channel. And on Facebook, I'd like to say a shout out and thank you for watching to Hebron Chisholm, and Yak Royale, and Kwesi Ntheto, Kadiko, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, and Sister Deborah Hatter Grant, and Michael Fergs Triggs. So peace to Reggie King, All Hype Man, and B Mac back on the YouTube chat. And so I don't want to take too much of your time. I know many of y'all are probably at work. So, this is something to listen to probably on your break. I don't know if you're on break, but if you are, this will be a good thing to listen to while you're on your lunch break. So what I'm going to do is share my screen as always, and then that I am going to go to the PowerPoint and from the beginning. So I'll start when I get confirmation that y'all can see everything good. Peace to Nebit Hebit, Zane Montego, Brother Ifatunde Fayemi, Sean P, and Mystic Clarky. Peace to all of you who have arrived in the chat. So awaiting the confirmation, and I see the confirmation, and we are good. So as stated, the title of this presentation is Ancient Sparta and Modern Police Brutality. What's the connection? And unshameless plug, if you haven't by now picked up my latest book, Alluja Volume 2, China into Religion and Philosophy, you can go to my website and get a copy of that, as well as another of my latest books that came out roughly around the same time, Towards a Comparative Dictionary of Chicam, which is Egyptian and Modern African Languages. Those both available on my website at asarimhotep.com. And the Alluja Volume 2 is on sale. So you get a discounted price than the one that you would find on Amazon. So I like to start off this conversation with a narrative that the late Dr. John Henry Clarke would always remind us of. So, John Henry Clarke, coming up in the early 1900s, was part of what we call in the academy the Independent African Academy. This is the education system of African people in the United States that was independent of the academy in terms of the mainstream European academy. So one of the mentors of Dr. John Henry Clarke was Arthur Schomburg, who the Schomburg Center in New York and for the New York Library is named after. And when studying African history, he reminded Dr. Clarke, as Dr. Clarke would tell us, that we must first study European history in relationship to the history of African people and their culture. And he said that he would never fully understand the history of Blacks until he understood world history, or he understood world history, or studied world history. So the context of African history, which of course is an ongoing event, can never be isolated without the study of world history. And a lot of times when we come into what we call consciousness, quote unquote, that we want to focus strictly on Africa in all aspects of it and ignore the rest of history. Well, the world is a closed system, and humans have been interacting with each other for hundreds of thousands of years over long distances. And so, within that context, we know that there's some localized history that in many instances throughout history, that localized history comes to affect the globe in the long term. So this is why in this conversation, instead of trying to understand the nature of police brutality here in the United States and in Europe in the modern time, we need to go back to see what the pattern is. And so that's exactly what we're doing today. So, this is just a graphic of Sparta, or a Spartan, so to speak, I think from the film. It may be from the film, or just may be inspired by the film 300. And so many of you may have seen that movie. It came out a number of years ago, which was a very visually stimulating film. But there are some historical things that were not mentioned or discussed in the film, that hopefully we'll get to today. So, and I should remind you that I'm going to be quoting a lot of information from a particular text. And I'm going to give the source of the primary text from which I'm getting this information from. But if you are listening on Facebook Live and of course on YouTube Live, there is a description for the current conversation. And at the bottom of the description, I have a list of references, some short text. They're not long. I cite one book in there, but the others are kind of short text that you can read. And I want to say a couple of videos that you can watch to give you a full context of Sparta in ancient times. So these are not my own words for the most part when it comes to this text, but the citation is at the end, but you can see it in the current description, if you happen to look now. And peace of sister Mika, just recognizing you coming in. Thank you for joining us. And Brian Hess and Phi Lightning Tist. Thank you for coming in and listening again. Now, so, many people may not know about Sparta outside of the film 300. And so, we're going to deal with a little bit of geographics, and then we're going to deal a little bit with the social structure of Sparta. And so during the archaic and classical periods between 800 and 323 BCE, ancient Greece consisted of several hundred polis, or city-states. Each polis was its own small country. Many of these were no more than small towns or even villages, which controlled sometimes very small territories. At the opposite end of this spectrum were the two largest, most powerful, and ultimately most influential Greek city-states, that is Athens and Sparta. Now, politically, they were polar opposites of each other. And we don't have time to really go into Athens, but that's a good conversation unto itself. And I'll probably deal with Athens in another presentation so that we can show the continuity from Greece to Rome to Britain to the United States in terms of the behavior, culture, and psychology of the people. But Athens' democratic government and open culture stood in stark contrast to the government and society of its chief rival, Sparta. Sparta was a warrior society of fierce, often unbeatable soldiers, and only warriors participated in political life. Spartan women had a reputation for being as fierce as their men, quite unlike their reclusive, segregated sisters in other Greek polis. I don't know how you pronounce that. Sparta was an imperial state which subjugated many of its neighbors in the Peloponnesus and turned their populations into a class of virtual slaves called helots. And we'll get into the helots more deeply a little later. This serf class outnumbered the Spartans many times over. So to keep the helots under control and suppress rebellions, the Spartans organized their entire society along military lines. The sole purpose of Spartan man was to be a soldier, and the only duty of a Spartan woman was to give birth to many soldiers. So while we mentioned that the Spartan women had a little bit more autonomy in terms of in relation to other Greek city-states, in reality, they were only seen as baby-making machines. And so, if it wasn't for biology, women, they would probably separate, the women from the men totally. And we'll get into why that is the case a little later. So, again, here is a map of the southern part of Greece. And so you see Athens over here in the top right, Corinth, Argos, Olympia, Messenia, and Sparta. So as stated, Sparta was really a group of villages, kind of a clump of villages together. So And remember that, we're saying city state in the modern time, but these were actual countries. And so we got to remember, like back in the day, before the advent of empire, what we call a country in the modern sense was really just a small collection of villages. And so this is exactly what you see here. And so, there's the Peloponnesian Wars, with them trying to fight the Persians and have a united Greece, but that's a whole conversation, in of itself. And so the Spartans, as mentioned, were a warrior culture. They weren't builders. They weren't philosophers. Their thing was, military, take over territory, make the people who we've conquered pay tribute to us. And so all of our energy and thought cannot be focused on, any kind of intellectual pursuits or any kind of building or whatnot. All our energy needs to be put on men training. And so there's a Greek historian by the name of Thucydides, and he said this about Sparta in terms of its landscape. If Sparta was to be deserted and nothing left but the temples and ground plan, distant ages would be very unwilling to believe that the power of the Spartans was at all equal to their fame. Their city is not built continuously and has no splendid temples or other monuments. It rather resembles a group of villages like the earliest towns of Greece, and would therefore make a poor show. So this Greek historian back in the day foreshadowed, what we would see in the modern times. And so if you was to go and do an archaeological dig in Sparta, you won't find much. Maybe some rusted weapons if it was buried deep, but that's, and some remnants of huts and things of that nature. But that's pretty much it, because again, the focus of this society was creating warriors. And so the social structure consisted of 3 different hierarchies, and really kind of 4. And so you had the Spartans, and then the Spartiates, the Periokoi, and the helots, for which, there were many revolts and caused a lot of Spartan paranoia. And we'll see why in a minute. So the Spartan is technically an inhabitant of the polis called Sparta, which was really an amalgamation of 5 villages or townships inside the geographical area called Lacedaemonia. When used loosely, the term Spartan meant a Spartiate, a full citizen. A Spartiate, the word used to refer to a full citizen of the polis of Sparta, who had gone through the agoge, and we'll get into that in a minute, and was serving in the Spartan military, also his female relatives. Not every Spartan was a Spartiate. The total number of Spartiates was never more than 9,000 in the population of 225,000 plus. By the 4th century BC, the number was down to around 750. The Great Earthquake of 465 and the Great Peloponnesian Wars, which I mentioned earlier, had a great deal to do with this. So when you talk about actual Spartans, the numbers were very few. But this is because in order to be a Spartan, you had to have both parents to be Spartans. Like you couldn't be an import into the country, so to speak, where your parents, were born and raised somewhere else. So this is a way to kind of make a genealogical, almost racial, criterion for being a Spartan. So it had nothing to do with color, but it had to do with lineage, so to speak. So The Periokoi are those dwelling round and about. It's really kind of a word meaning those is on the fringes or those at the borders. They are natives of Lacedaemon who did not have full citizen rights. They were free, not slaves or serfs, but no role in government. They were farmers and merchants and craftsmen, mostly, farmers and merchants and craftsmen were mostly Periokoi. The Periokoi had their own laws and customs, could pursue any profession or trade they like, and had their own local officials and dignitaries. Now we get to the helots, who are going to be very important, to this particular discussion. And so the helots were the conquered subjects used as serfs, both in the Eurotas Valley and in the Messenia to the west. Legally, they were enemies of the state and subject to arbitrary, brutal treatment. They were the property of the Spartan state, not necessarily individual Spartans. Now, keep in mind that I'm going to be making references to the helots and African Americans here in the United States. And you're going to notice some commonalities. So first and foremost, the helots were the slave class, the people who they conquered and brought into Sparta and forced them to do slavery. And so just like unlike the United States, the helots or the slaves were owned by the state and not necessarily individual people as personal property. And so in the United States, the Africans who were enslaved became the personal properties of individual families and businesses. And we can argue that after the Emancipation Proclamation, that really the slavery had transferred now to the state. And this is actually the argument by, I forgot it, is it Israel Aharon? I know it's Aharon. He wrote a book called something sovereign. What's the name of that book? See, with me not being home, I don't have my books ready behind me. But it's sovereign. It has to do with sovereignty or whatnot. And I might, if I can get in contact with him, get him on the show to discuss, because he has a series of books on sovereignty. And in the book that I'm thinking about, and I can't think of the name at the moment, it talks about the transfer of ownership in terms of the Declaration, not the Declaration of Independence, in terms of, when we were allegedly free. So you come to find out that, our freedom was written in terms of a military document that transferred the ownership to the state, or the United States, the Federation itself. And so as soon as I find that name, I will, and somebody can, Aharon, sovereign. I'm gonna look it up right now. I can't, sovereign, Aharon, sovereign. Again, he has a series of sovereign books. And nope. I may be spelling his name wrong. But since I'll come back to it, and I'm gonna make sure that y'all get the name of that text, because it's a very important text that I think everyone needs to read. But anyway, I will continue. And so, so again, throughout this conversation, I'm going to be making these references to the helots in comparison to African Americans here in the United States. And so the emancipation of helots was common or was what they call common. The text suggests that this is normally associated with completion of military service. Revolts are also common. The helots or rural population had a significantly worse status. Helots were tied to the land and were officially the property of the Lacedaemonian government. And so the Spartans believed in eugenics. And so again, the nature of the warrior class was built on this notion that, you know, certain individuals were just genetically built to be warriors and Spartans. And so they started looking at, as early as basically birth, for signs of people who were genetically deficient. And so they tried to psychologically, you know, at least in their mind, you know, justify, you know, who could be considered a Spartan or not. And if you did not meet the criteria, if you did not show signs of a good warrior at birth, they would kill the child. And matter of fact, if the firstborn child was a girl, they would kill the child. And so, you know, this isn't discussed in the film of 300 when we're talking about the Spartans. And so, so that's what the birth inspections are, you know, regarding this. And they had certain special training for girls. So even girls were expected to be warriors. So if they were invaded, you know, they could defend the land, but more so, again, it has to go back to this nature of eugenics. So if you have a warrior father and then you have a warrior mother, it increases the chance that you're going to have warrior children. So this is primarily the only reason why they train the girls. And so, as mentioned in terms of eugenics, we can define it as the science, even though it's not science, of improving a human population by controlled breeding to increase the occurrence of desirable heritable characteristics. So the desired heritable characteristics that the Spartans were looking for was warriorness, I guess, if you can consider that a term. And so every infant was examined by members of the Gerousia. If the baby did not pass the test, he was placed at the base of Mount Taygetus, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, for several days for a test that ended with the death by exposure or survival. And here's an aspect of the Spartan society that isn't discussed much. So here we go. The agoge, which started at 7. The boys lived in groups called herds, agale, under an older man. At the age of 12, boys would be given only one item of clothing per year, a red cloak known as fornikis, you know, and I'm probably butchering all these Greek words. They were intentionally underfed to encourage them to steal food for themselves. Around age 12, the boys would enter into an institutionalized relationship with a young adult male Spartan, which they call pederasty. And so pederasty is not simply like in the modern sense in terms of a mentorship. And even the word mentor, if you really look up the word mentor, is basically the same thing. So I don't even like using that term in regards into the guidance of young people. But they were having sex. There was sexual relations. So remember, all the Spartan men had to go through this. So not only basically are they gay, they're pedophiles. So they're gay pedophile warriors. This is the nature of Sparta. And so this is what I mean by they're not telling everything in the film 300. And so they tried to make it seem like the other Greeks, like in Athens, were the funny boys in the film. And I wish I could have queued up, that conversation so y'all can hear it from the film 300. But anyway, at age 18, the students became reserve members of the Spartan army. Some youths were allowed to become part of the Krypteia, which is a type of secret police instructed to spy on the helot population. Sounds like ancient COINTELPRO. Roughly age 20, the students became fully part of the Cisticia, and Spartan armies still had to ask and be voted into a mess hall. If rejected, which they had 10 years of trial, they would not become a full citizen. At the age of 30, men were permitted to marry and to become full citizens of Sparta who could vote and hold office. The girls were also encouraged to help the males by humiliating them in public and by criticizing their exercising. Just as Spartan males were raised to become warriors, the females of Sparta were trained for their primary task, giving birth to warriors. So, we all see the image that they try to portray of the Spartans in the film 300 as these manly warrior men going around, loving their women and all this other kind of stuff. But that's not the case. This is a more accurate depiction. So I'm not sure how detailed it comes up on your screen. But yeah, there's just dudes running around naked, feeling on each other. And you can see them having a relation right here with a young man. And so this was the nature of the culture itself. So I want to go back to that part of the stealing. So remember that they were trained, or they would starve basically the young men in order for them to want to go steal food, but this was encouraged. And so, as the text says, they were also deliberately underfed and encouraged to steal their food, but the boys were severely punished if caught, not for the act of stealing itself, but for being caught. The goal was to make them stealthy, cunning, and resourceful. In other words, they were trained to rob and steal, to lie. And they had to do it so well that they individually didn't get caught. So there's no sense of ethics and morals with these individuals. They've been training all their life to rob, steal, and kill. This is the nature of Sparta. Hold on one sec. Gotta position this phone here. Boom. So that should tell you something in of itself. And so, and when you kind of compare that to what goes on in the United States, that seems to be the case. Even, with, a lot of people in authority. It's, it's cool as long as you don't get caught. But, if you get caught, okay, then we got to give you some level of punishment. So Spartan women, for it was not by imitating other states, but by devising a system utterly different from that of most others, that he, Lycurgus, made his country prosperous. He insisted on physical training for the female no less than for the male. Moreover, he instituted races and trials of strength for women competitors as for men, believing that if both parents are strong, they produce more vigorous offspring. So just re-emphasizing what I mentioned earlier. And so when you think about the women from Athens versus the women from Sparta, this is a simple comparison. So Athenian women were not educated. Spartan women were. Athenian women were not participants in gymnastics. Spartan women were. Housework, Athenian women, yes. Spartan women, no. Why? Because the slaves did all the work. Their women didn't have to lift a finger. Own property, Athenian women, no. Spartan women, yes. To be able to wear short skirts, Athenian women, no. And then Spartan women, yes. So there's a deep contrast into how the women were perceived. But then again, because of the homosexual nature of the culture of the men and the warrior nature, if it wasn't for the biology of women, they wouldn't have any purpose for them. Their sole thing was the production of strong warrior men. That was the nature and the basis of their society. And so we'll delve a little bit into the Periokoi. By 750 BC, the Spartans controlled the entire plain of Laconia. Within this territory, they were a minority, but one that dominated a large population of non-Spartan peoples. One group of non-Spartans were the Periokoi, or neighbors, as they say. The term Periokoi literally means those who are on the fringes. The Periokoi were not Spartan citizens. They were free men, not slaves, and they enjoyed a degree of local autonomy in their domestic affairs, but were distinctly inferior to Spartans. They owned militaries. They participated in military service to the Spartans. They were served in segregated auxiliary military units. Sparta's neighbors, so to speak, were primarily filled the roles of skilled craftsmen and traders, the occupations that the Spartan men themselves came to reject in favor of the life of full-time career soldiers. So again, as I mentioned, the Spartan men were not, great engineers. They could probably build weapons, but they were not the best farmers. They were not philosophers. They were not stargazers. They didn't have, any desires to learn about the origin of the universe. I don't even think they have a cosmology. I have to look into that. But, so that was the jobs of everybody else. So those jobs were beneath them. It is the warrior that was the top in their society. And so even today, it is the warrior that is looked at as, the highest in prestige, even here in the United States. And that's just kind of Europe now. But that goes a little bit deeper and not just with Sparta itself. And that is because of the nomadic pastoralist origins of the Proto-Indo-Europeans. And nomadic pastoralism breeds these type of societies where the warrior is seen as the head, as the most desirable. So this is why, there's always this big thing in the United States about the service of people who are in the military and why they get all these honors and things of that nature. And we're just supposed to, just honor them no matter what, because it's still built, that same psyche is still present in the modern day. So now we get to the helots. And so again, this was the slave class. And, this has nothing to do with them being white, in contrast to black. They were just slaves. They were not Spartans. So the helots, despite their inferior social and political status of the Periokoi, they were much better off than another group of non-Spartans called the helots. Helots were by far the largest class of people living in Spartan territory. Most of the helots came from the lands of the once free and independent neighboring city-state of Messenia, who had been defeated in battle by the Spartans. The helots became virtual slaves, owned not by individual Spartans, but the collective by the Spartan state. The helots in Laconia and in Messenia worked as peasant serfs who farmed the land for the benefit of their Spartan overlords. Not content with their status, the Messenian helots would rise up in a series of massive rebellion and force the Spartans to reorganize their entire society along military lines to suppress the helot population. Again, I'm making this contrast between the African-American class, which is the slave class here in the United States, and the helots. And it's because of these uprisings that the Spartans had to reorganize their entire society to operate along military lines. And so you see the same type of response to the uprisings and revolts to the oppression of African people here in the United States. Their response being, we need to more militarize our police and suppress these helots, aka African Americans, aka Africans in America. And so you see they go by the same game plan. And we'll get deeper into this a little later. So here's just a rendition of some of the helots serving, I assume this is wine or something like that, to the Spartans. They are the servants, and the slave caste. And so here's an early depiction of that. And so to understand the helots, we have to understand the early Messian wars, because they're really Messian folks, but helot is the word that is used by the Spartans to refer to them. So by around 730 BCE, Spartan had conquered the neighboring city-state of Messenia in the southwest corner of the Peloponnesus. Messenia ceased to exist as an independent polis for 400 years. Its population was made helots, a class of serf slaves belonging to the Spartan state. The lands of Messenia were divided up among the Spartan population, and each parcel of land came with a population of helots, who now farmed it for the benefit of Spartan man and his family. Not all Spartans received land, only veterans of Messenian wars received this gift. And this became the basis of the Spartan aristocracy. So if anybody remembers and understands how Africa was divided up, you see this is the same process. So in 1884 going into 1885, you have what is called the Berlin Conference. And in the Berlin Conference, these Europeans got together and carved up Africa and divided it amongst themselves so they can stop fighting amongst themselves. And so, this is why you have in certain regions, certain Africans speaking Portuguese, certain Africans speaking French, and others speaking English, because those folks came into Africa and divided the land. So they didn't become, they weren't independent anymore. And so the same thing happened in Sparta with their neighbor, the Messians, amongst in Messenia. And so divided up Messenia, took away their sovereignty, and it was divided up amongst the warrior class who had been through wars, the veterans of wars, as kind of the spoils of war. So this is what we see here. So as one author notes, bitterly oppressed with great burdens like donkeys, they, the helots, must bring to their masters out of grievous necessity a half of all the fruits of their fields. So imagine that you done spent all this time farming or whatnot, and you automatically have to give half of your yield to a foreign entity. This is what happens in Africa to this date. Even though they're allegedly independent states, they are still paying tribute to France and England, et cetera, et cetera. Another author notes, they, the Spartans, assigned to the helots every shameful task leading to disgrace, for they ordained that each one of them must wear a dogskin cap and wrap himself in animal skins and receive a certain number of beatings every year, regardless of any wrongdoing, so that they may never forget they were slaves. Moreover, if any exceeded the vigor proper to a slave's condition, they made death the penalty. So you couldn't come up in the society. They would always do what they can to remind you of your place within that society. And so this is why I have highlighted in the red within the larger sentence talking about the helots would receive a certain number of beatings every year, regardless of any wrongdoing. Again, the contrast between the modern police state and the state of Sparta. They do the same thing. And so African Americans going around here wondering, why do they keep, abusing us and things of this nature? It's to remind you of your place. And so even if you, come up and become middle class or rich or whatnot, it doesn't matter. And so we got to understand that this is 2,000 years of practice and social conditioning. This is their culture. It doesn't click to be human amongst this group. And this is one of the reasons why they're always looking to Greece and Sparta for inspiration on how to be. This is why you learn about these folks in high school and the like. We continue. The helot dilemma. While helots were forced to work their own ancestral lands and give as much as half its produce to support Spartan citizens, the Messenians and other helots in Laconia were clearly not happy with their fates. Because, of course, people, are born to be free. And so oppression is not a natural state. The Spartans lived in constant fear of massive helot uprisings, and such rebellions happened on several occasions during the next 400 years of Spartan dominance. The Greek historian Thucydides reports that Spartan policy is always mainly governed by the necessity of taking precautions against the helots. Spartan armies rarely traveled far from home for fear of revolts amongst the helots. And so you have to understand that the helots outnumbered the Spartans. And so to keep them suppressed, they would continue to oppress them physically. This is why you had to have the random beatings and things. And so to try to suppress revolts and revolutionary thinking. And so you see, like in the modern day, when white folks have an issue, with their government, they want to, end the quarantine because they're bored at home. And, they don't care if they die or not from the virus. They go out and march and things. And the president is like, hey, let them be. They're just voicing their opinions. Then you have the helots, the Africans in America, who protesting because of legitimate reasons, in terms of state oppression and the killings of us without punishment from the cops. Then they send out the military to come break up peaceful protest, because they're operating off of the same playbook. They know their history. They know how to operate. They've been doing this for 2,000 years. And it's documented. And so I don't want y'all thinking I'm making this up. Like, this is why, you have the source material in the description. And I provide the primary one that I've used here for this conversation. So, which brings us to the Krypteia, Spartan's secret police. Sparta's domination of the helots was not based solely on military discipline among soldiers ready to make the ultimate sacrifice even in the face of overwhelming odds. It was also based on a secret police that employed methods that may fairly be described in today's terms as a form of state-sponsored terrorism. And so I'll save that. The best of young warriors among the Spartan youths were inducted into an organization called the Krypteia, literally the Spartan secret service. They were sent out on secret missions with only a dagger and some supplies, with orders to scatter across the countryside to keep hidden during the day. At night, they prowled the highways and villages of the helots, where they killed them at random. Although they did seek out any helots who seemed especially strong or that might be potential troublemakers, the Krypteia's purpose was to terrorize the helots into submission, performing much the same role as the notorious secret police of modern dictatorships, including the Nazi Gestapo in Germany during the 1930s and 40s, or the Soviet KGB. This comparison is apt. This comparison is apt because they use secrecy and state-sponsored murder to achieve the end of suppressing oppression to the Spartan regime among a broad segment of the general population. The Krypteia was also a form of initiation for elite warriors. So you have to understand that the killings by police officers on these Black African citizens is part of the game plan, part of the strategy to keep the psyche suppressed from attempting to rebel and make the United States a human-centered society. And so I may have to do my presentation over again on how they're never, how every time you try to humanize the United States, the non-humans, fight vigorously against the humans. And so this is important to keep. And so I mentioned COINTELPRO, the infiltration of the United States CIA and other operatives to break up, revolutionary organizations here in the United States. And the kinds of murders, like how they did our brother Fred Hampton, Martin Luther King, hands, in dealing with our good brother Malcolm, etc. And the list goes on to just ordinary citizens. It doesn't matter. They have to do these killings every now and then to keep, the opposition suppressed, which is us, because we are the canary in the mine. We're the ones who voice the danger and things of that nature. And so when you see these types of responses, again, this isn't random. This is their culture. They have to respond like military against the citizens, if we're even considered citizens. This is why they have to randomly beat you on the corners and things to put in your mind that, you are not to fight the system, that the system is strong, quote unquote. And so, here's some footage from the 60s. It's an ongoing thing. It's the same strategy. White people are very predictable here in the United States. And so every single time that we come out peacefully, just voicing our concerns, the response is beat them, sick dogs on them, pour water or unleash water hoses, high-powered water hoses, I should say, on, men, women, and children. And so the latest incident is just business as usual. And so we have to respond differently. We have to be different. And this is why it's imperative for, especially at minimum, our men to get their act together and train your family. And I mean train in all areas of life, not only in terms of physicality, in terms of martial arts training. You need to train in weapons. You need to train in agriculture. You need to train in mechanics. And you need to train in economics. African people should be organized and training. You're not going to defeat these folks unorganized the way that they do. And so if and you shouldn't have a fear of them. They die and bleed just like everybody else. And that's what they're scared of. They're more scared of you than anything. But this is how whites see themselves here in America, as the descendants of the Spartans. And this is how police see themselves when they come onto the scene, as Spartan warriors. And so we started off with Dr. John Henry Clarke, and we'll end with Dr. John Henry Clarke, who tells us that history tells a people where they still must go and what they still must be. If you understand that this is the culture and they've been like this for 2,000 plus years, you don't rely on trying to have a conversation with them. You should be focused on gaining and maintaining power, because only power respects power. And so we need to quit responding like weaklings and understand, study their history, study them like they study you. And so, as I mentioned earlier, this is only the first of many conversations along this line. So after the conversation about Athens, because I'm going to stay in Greece, and after I deal with Rome, then I'm going to deal with, Britain and, Scotland and the United States, because that is a continuation of the things that we saw in Greece. And the main text that I'm going to be drawing from is this text here that many of you have probably seen me advertise as a recommended read. It's a thick read, but it is a very good read nonetheless. And that's Albion Seed, 4 British Folkways in America. And so the objective of me presenting on this text is to answer the question, why do cops continually get away with murder in the US? So we have to start in Greece, and then we have to go into, all the way to Rome and Britain. And then, you'll understand what is going on here in the United States. And so we'll talk about the Gentile class and how basically the United States is a mafia, and the police are their quote unquote legal sanction enforcers. So this is the text that I, copied the main text from, and it's by PJ Brand. No date is given. It's only probably 37, 38 pages. It's called Athens and Sparta, Democracy versus Dictatorship. So again, the link to that PDF is in the description. You have to expand the description and you'll see a list of references there. And so if it's online, of course, there's a link directly to the documents. And so, of course, since we're talking about Sparta, I could not resist posting this meme. But we always end on an African note. So I appreciate everyone for listening. If there's any questions or whatnot, I will take them now. I haven't been paying attention to the chat, so I don't know what has been going on or what has been said. So give me a second to review some things. Is helots related to the Hellenes of Greece with Christianity? The Hellenes, that's really the name of the Greeks. is helos. That's really the name of the people of Greece in total. And so they all speak the same language. Of course, you have dialects in these different city states, but they're called the helos. And so the Hellenes is just the Greeks in general. So the helots would be Hellenes, but I don't think those two terms themselves are related. So let me see. Hold on. That's the name of the book. Pawn Sovereignty. And then there's Sovereign Evolution, and then Sovereign Psyche. It's Ezra Aharon. That's the name of the author. So thank you, Phi Lighten Tist, for giving providing that name. So yes, it's he has several, like I said, he has several books dealing with sovereignty, and it's Sovereign Psyche, Pawn Sovereignty, and Sovereign Evolution. So it's specifically it's pawn sovereignty that is directly related to the discussion that I was talking about in regards to Abraham Lincoln and the transference of ownership of Africans from individuals to the state. Let me see. Okay, going for 11. I'm not seeing anything. Just kind of looking for questions and comments to highlight. And I appreciate you for the contribution. I found it. Okay, salute. I gotta find, be different. Yep. You're welcome, BK Trainer. Thank you for listening. And anyone who is not a subscriber to this channel, please subscribe and like this video and share and continue the conversation. Let me see. He said, we haven't responded yet, just reacting. A response is calculated. Indeed. This is very informative presentation. You're welcome. You're welcome. Thank you, Brother Reggie. Okay, so someone asked, sorry, what is your opinion on Black people in law enforcement? I believe that Black people need to be in law enforcement, and there's just no other way to help curtail the abuse that we find given by white people in our neighborhoods, especially. But having Black officers is not a guarantee that they are going to be benevolent. But this is what we have to do. Part of the strategy, if we're talking about staying, living, and existing here in the United States, is that you're going to have to create institutions of learning and training, and kind of look at early those who would like to be into law enforcement. You have to train them in the culture, and then help pay for their schooling and things of this nature to go into either law, in terms of being lawyers, in terms of being judges, in terms of being prosecutors, and then of course the actual law enforcement itself. We need Black, conscious, and well-educated FBI agents, CIA agents, things of that nature. It's just no other way. And there's a video. It may take me a minute, but I saved it, and I was thinking about showing it. There's a video of some police officers harassing a Sudanese person from South Sudan. And I'm going to share this. Hold on. I'm going to share this video, or I'm going to play this video. It's on Facebook. I'm pretty sure there's a YouTube version of this. So hold on one second as I. Okay. So let me share my screen right now. Let me hide this. So what I'm about to share with you is one of the reasons why you need to be in positions of authority here in the United States. That you can't, you got to get rid of this, that the concept and the idea of the police is bad, and that Black people are enemies who are police officers and people in the CIA and government and things of this nature. This is a power move to be a part of this. So here's an example of why this is the case. So I'm gonna share, and I'm gonna go full share the video for people who are on my Facebook page or whatnot. And so if you didn't catch what was going on, the brother, the Sudanese brother, he's an actual FBI agent. And so these two cops, actually it was three cops, just decides that they want to harass, one of this brother for no reason, who was just sitting there with friends and colleagues, minding their own business. And you saw, and I don't know if it, you could hear it clearly, but he's asking them for a reason for why they are harassing them, and then they decide they want to arrest him because he may have a warrant or something to this nature. And so you saw them forcefully put him up and then put the handcuffs on him. And the whole time everybody knows who he is. They just want, and this is why they had the video out and recording it. And so they wanted, you can tell that they wanted that got you moment. So as soon as he pulled out the wallet and he saw that, the FBI badge, in the wallet, they immediately, unhandcuffed him. And so, this could have went all kinds of ways, but we see this all the time. So, to answer the question, I'm not saying it is the ultimate move. I'm just saying it is a power move. When you put yourself in positions of power strategically, in certain areas, this is why when they get together, they make sure in their family, they got someone who's a judge, somebody who's a constable, somebody who's a lawyer, somebody who's a doctor, some folks in the military, et cetera, et cetera. They make sure that their family are put in positions of power. And this is what you got to do. You got to start thinking in terms of power and not simply a response and reaction. And so think about it like this. The 4 officers in Minneapolis that, when the video came out or whatnot, they were immediately fired. Why? Because the police chief is Black. Now, if it was a white person, they would have made all kinds of, we need to investigate and, get the whole story. No, fired. And so now, the second step is going through the process of bringing the charges and things. But you're able to make those kinds of moves when you are the chief of police. And so it's again, it's not saying that you're not going to find corruption, amongst Black folks who are in those positions, which is why I also qualified that with, you have to train Black people Afrocentrically and then send them into those positions. And you're constantly working together and things of that nature to make the situation better. Because if you're on the outside, trying to fight, and you're not actually fighting, like, in terms of military war, you're not going to win. And so it has to be done on all different fronts. Someone says, I thought race was debunked in 2003 by DNA and a molecular clock. Do you think race abolition would help, do nothing, or hinder? It has nothing to do with race. Race is the concept and the idiocy of a dumb people. It's about power. And so regardless of how they get into power and what's their logical or illogical justification for oppressing them particular people is irrelevant. I can care what your ideology is and what your mythology is if I have power, because it doesn't matter what you think, as long as I can respond appropriately to any kind of violations that you try to enact upon me. And so that's regardless of who it is. I don't care if it's black people in power. Black people don't care about the concept of race. We care about oppression, and who's in power to oppress us. And so we don't care, how you label it, who it is. It's just, are you treat us humanely, don't start none, won't be none. It's just as simple as that. That's the final say, on that. And thank you, Robert Rand, for listening and watching, the archives, and my other daughter. So I wish I could share the Facebook post, but I can't. But Sister Mika says, that's my family. My daughter is a future lawyer, and my other daughter in the Navy. I agree. Yeah, you gotta infiltrate. And so, people talk about integration, like the fight for integration was bad. It had a negative effect because we didn't have the cultural competence, the cultural consciousness in terms of power, but they understood what it was. Is you open the doors to put your people in place so that, you can make certain moves within the society. This is why they fought so hard against integration, because they knew exactly what that meant. That meant the crumbling of their power structure. And so, we got to think more strategically. Even when we protest and respond, it has to be more strategically. So I don't have anything much to say outside of that. But I will, this is what I do. I will advertise some upcoming shows. So, boom, on June the 9th, I will have Dr. Sally Ann Ashton, who is an Egyptologist and psychologist, on the program. So that's going to be on a Tuesday. The show time is going to be 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, and it will be 6 p.m. London time. So she'll be joining us from London. And so a very important and powerful person in Egyptology, even though she's really not in Egyptology anymore because she's dealing with psychology, but we'll deal with that as well. But you can consider her an ally in terms of the intellectual argumentation on the Africanness of ancient Egyptians. And so we'll talk about her and her research in that area and how she came to the conclusions in which she has. And then we have up next Dr. Ifeatayo Flannery, who's an Africologist, and I think she's also in psychology, who's currently, I want to say, at San Francisco State University, New Orleans, born and bred, ATL raised, Temple made, and now she's on the West Coast, and she's going to be talking with us on that Thursday, June the 11th. And is going to be what I think 2 p.m. On the West Coast time, so around 5 p.m. Eastern time. We will have our conversation with her, and so she'll help us kind of navigate and bring some perspective on this particular series of events and how Africology can kind of bring clarity to the events of today. So a very important and powerful sister who I know personally. And hold on, let me go to the comments. We'll be in the house. Kofi, yeah, it's not the same nation. There are hold on, there are many with prominent voice within the Black community that speak against going to college. Let me see. Someone says there are many with a prominent voice within the Black community that speak against going to college to attain a degree in order to secure positions. How can people discern pros versus cons? That would be a good conversation unto itself. But it depends on the nature of the profession that you want to be in, and as well as in terms of qualifying to teach. And so we got to keep those things in mind when we're talking about getting degrees. Some professions don't require or are beginning to not require a college degree, but others do. And so, but you go to college for more than simply trying to get a job in a profession. You're going to get access to resources and to live and develop amongst diverse voices and to learn how to argue and articulate certain things. And so I recommend college for everyone, because college is an African concept and thing, And so some of y'all need y'all to go become billionaires and fund the development of our own college and university. And to hire all those Black folks who went to college and got their degrees. These are the things that we got to do. Think strategically and not with our emotions. Sister Deborah Grant says, my problem is the Black folks who do get into these positions and then do nothing to help their own community. My grandmother used to call it forgetting where they came from. Exactly. This is why I said, see, this is what people what African people in the United States don't seem to grasp, is that you can't, because most of us grew up Christian, or most of us grew up Muslim. And in the Abrahamic traditions, we're always looking for a savior. We're always looking for that one to come from the heavens and then work on our behalf and free us. It doesn't happen that way. Culture is done on purpose. You create the people that the culture needs, that the society needs. So you have to create the institutions that indoctrinate and direct the behavior and attitudes and values towards the people. So when they get into those positions, they have a framework and a worldview that sees the connection with the people so they don't forget where they come from. But if you don't create the people, if you don't make it to where they have an obligation to the community, they have a sense, they feel a sense of priority and attachment to the community, then you're just wishing. You're just throwing seeds randomly and hoping that one of them, will germinate. And so that's just not how it's done. They don't do that. They breed. Remember what they were doing. They're purposely developing women as warriors in terms of the Spartans, developing men as warriors, and breeding them together in hopes of making other warriors. But they're not just hoping that the children come out to be warriors. They train them since age 7 to be warriors. And so we have to train our children from age 7 to be warriors in all aspects of life. So our saviors don't come from the sky. They come from the wombs of our mothers, you know, and they are cultivated by the social environment in which they find themselves growing up in. And so the first environment is the household, the home. And so you get with some people who have the similar values, and y'all link up and create a village. And y'all village get together and put your money together, and you pay for their education. You make sure that you check up on them and making sure they're doing all the things right. And then you force them, as a result of getting this good education, that you have to work for the community for a number of years. Then you're free to do whatever you want to do in life. That's how you do it. That's how you get the people, you know, in those positions and working for the people. You indoctrinate them. There's nothing wrong with indoctrination. It's what you indoctrinate and is how you indoctrinating people. Every culture indoctrinates its citizens. So you need to make them critical thinkers. You need to make them, you know, well articulators. You need to make them, you know, people who have a love and attachment and a deep richness, you know, for African people and African culture. So you can't socialize our young people to hate everything Black and then expect them to do well when they get into positions of power. You have to breed them while they're young. And so this is why these conversations are important, and why you need to take this upon yourself to start with your children and family. Because of course they got all kinds of distractions. So you make yourself excellent so that they can see that this stuff is working for you. When the people see that the stuff is working for you, they'll look to see what it is that you're doing. What is it about you and your value system and your ethic, your work ethic, and your ethics in general that allow for you to do and make the kinds of moves that you do. And you do that as a family. And you try to, as a family, also to have economic independence. Because the less that you are dependent, you know, on a particular job, the more you're able to voice your opinions, you know, in the world. And so again, the issue is power. And there's always going to be about power. And so this is the things that we got to do. So I don't want to take up too much of your time. Didn't want to make this video too long. So we're here at 1.5 hours. So, you know, thank you all. You know, appreciate you for supporting, you know, the channel, both with your presence and financially. And so, you know, with that, I am going to end the program. I will play, you know, some music on the way out. And so here is some ways to reach me and ways that you can support, again, financially through Cash App, and just, you know, catch up with me on these social media platforms. And that is pretty much it for this evening. So what should I play? I'll just play this one. So thank you all for joining me. I'll see y'all on the other side.